once you examine all these different pieces, then you can kind of pick some pieces and say these are going to stay kind of the same throughout the series, and then pick another element and say this is going to change. And there's an example of what I'm talking about on 240 and 241. This is a really cool idea that they've done with Lakeside Science and Technology Park. And they've obviously kept this green color and this blue color as sort of mainly the green, as a color that's going to stay consistent throughout. And this sort of wild geometric shape idea, they're going to keep consistent, but they're going to vary it as it goes throughout. And you can see there's all these little different geometric sketches that they can use over top of imagery, or like this cover that's got kind of a picture of a field. They can put it over top of that with some blocks of green color. And you look at these, and they're all very different in their actual layouts. There's a poster, there's a brochure, there's what looks like a book, maybe some advertisements. This is kind of a whole brand series, but they all feel like they're part of a family. They all have this green, they all have this geometric kind of shape element, and they even have different versions of their logo for different layouts. So you see, there's a lot of there's a lot of wiggle room whenever you're designing a series, but you need to have one or two elements that kind of stays consistent throughout, and the rest you can push the boundaries, or you can kind of keep it safe. But as long as and you just kind of have to look at it whenever you're done, or as you're building these ideas out, look at it and say, does that look like it's part of what I've created? Is this part of this series, part of the family? So it gives another example of ways to do that. Up at the top of 241, it looks like some chocolate bars, and the way they've branded those, they're all kind of this silver package or brown package, and the difference is, and they all use the same kind of line illustration, this reversed out white line illustration, and to kind of create the family within the series, they've color coded the different kinds of chocolate, and they've done a different illustration for each one. So if you look at them, they're part of a family because they've used the same fonts, the same layout. The logos in the same place, and the description of the product, the same background colors. But just by changing those blocks of color and adding some different illustrations in the same style, it creates this series. And you could probably expand that as many times as you wanted to. And that's really helpful, especially if you're working with a brand that maybe is going to expand down the road, which generally is the case. Like whenever you get the job, let's say they have 4 products, okay? So you create this design system that has 4 different maybe color coding, or 4 different illustrations, 4 different, whatever it may be. But you want to leave yourself some room so that they can expand on that. So that they can add more colors or more illustrations down the road in the same style, so they can build their brand and keep it consistent down the road. So let's see, what else to talk about? So design systems, like I said, they're very important. You can have variation, but it needs to kind of stay within the family. And for our assignment, we're going to become more aware of this. Talks about pacing and sequencing on 242 and 243. And that's just sort of, this gets into more whenever you're laying out magazines or things like that. My first graphic design job, I worked at a magazine, a weekly publication. And it gets pretty hard to come up with new ways to lay out the same magazine over and over again and still make it be interesting to the reader. And actually, the magazine I worked at didn't really do a very good job of that. But it talks about some different strategies on 242, ways to vary the layout of pages and still keep it consistent, part of the same family, kind of like we're talking about. But make it still logical so people that are reading don't get lost, but it's still interesting whenever they turn the page. And it talks about some different structural variations, ways to lay out images, and ways to kind of switch up where the image is, where the text is, while still keeping the same underlying structure. It still has 3 columns, or whatever it may be. Then there's another one underneath that called content presentation, and that's changing the visual attributes. Either you're changing the color, changing the relationship of how big the image is to how much text you have. Maybe the image treatment. Maybe you have a black and white photo for one article, and full color photos for another article, and illustration for another article. Maybe some articles have an image in a square, maybe across the top half of the page, bleeds off the edge, and then the next article has, like we were talking about, where it's silhouetted and the text kind of runs around the image, to create another dynamic shift, but it's all still part of the same magazine. And there are a lot of magazines that are really good examples of this. Magazines have great graphic design for the most part, because there's a lot of advertising dollars in there. If you look at like a Rolling Stone, if you look at a Rolling Stone magazine, they have some sections that are the same every month, and usually in the same order, editorials and ask so-and-so, all these different things. And then the feature articles are different. So they want to try and mix that up as much as possible, so it's interesting as people are turning the pages. They see, oh wow, and it keeps people interested, but you're still aware that you're in that Rolling Stone experience, if that makes sense. Let's see. So that's pretty much it. And I've talked a lot today, this week, obviously, but I love this stuff. This is the cool stuff. This is where you really start to synthesize everything that you've learned, and start to see the enormous amount of freedom that you have as a designer and different things you can do. If you're hurting yourself if you just do the first thing that comes to your mind just to get it done with. Whether you're in school or at a job or whatever, because if you have those ideas and you can train your creativity, then you can really do stuff that you would have never thought that you could have been able to do if you just follow the steps and be conscious of all these different elements instead of just it looks good. So let me talk about your assignment real quick for this week. Since I've already talked for half an hour, it looks like. Your assignment's not going to be too difficult, but it's just more of this becoming aware of all these different things in your surroundings, because there's so much. Graphic design is everywhere that it's really easy to become conscious of these things, and then if you're conscious of them, then it starts to bleed into your own work, without too much effort. So what I want you to do is I want you to find 3 examples of type and image being integrated, whether that's online, in a magazine, in a book, wherever, on a billboard. I want you to find 3 examples of this, and feel free to go out into the world, because actually for the second part of your assignment, you're going to have to go out into the world, probably. So, look in your environment. Look at magazines, whatever it may be. Go to the bookstore and take pictures of a magazine if you find something. But 3 examples of type and image integrated together, and that's pretty open. But the type needs to complement the image, and the image needs to complement the type. They need to be working together in some way, not just a photo with some funny type underneath it. They need to be integrated together, whether that's one on top of the other, or just if they're interplay together, like maybe it's a silhouette with text coming into it, or the text mimics the elements of the image, whatever that may be. 3 examples of that, and try and find some different a variety of examples. Second part of the assignment, I want you to go out and find 3 examples of a design system. And an example of that is like the chocolate bars on page 241. And just off the top of my head, the grocery store probably has millions of examples of this system where you can, the milk. What kind of milk has the blue cap? 2%. How did you know that? Because you've seen this design system your whole life. So maybe go find different kinds of coffee, or the milk design system, or all different kinds of honey bunches of oats have different varieties that are all kind of different color coded. So, and it's everywhere. So get out there and look and see what you can find.